All right, welcome back to another episode of Preacher in the Hat. My name is Derek. Eric is right beside me on camera. We've got my dad, Steve, across the way, and back for another round is Mr. Jeff Shelnutt. And we don't withhold applause here.
Yes, sir.
I know we got a chance. It's still the same day for us, but last week for our listeners to hear some of the experiences you've had in the mission field or whatever. And I know some people probably heard some of the things that you were saying are like, oh man, I wish you guys would kind of stay and stick on that for a while. I want to hear more about that. But we have saved what I think is one of the more impactful, and I think what people will find, honestly, one of the more captivating stories that you have. Pun intended, not intended. So I don't even know how we want to this. I want to give like maximum amount of time here.
Yeah. So this we mentioned at the end of the last episode that this is the stories that led up to your and Patrick's exit from Nigeria. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it.
Let's see where to start.
When was it?
It was 2015.
2015.
July of 2015.
You were living in Nigeria, out in the village that you had built a house, a medical clinic. You had been there by that time, 6, 7,
eight
about
going
8
on
years,
9 years.
almost 9 years. You were well known in that neck of the woods by the people there. The Fulani who traveled through, as we talked about last episode, would come through for medical help. You would be able to share the gospel with them, as well as with the villagers. They had welcomed you in 9 years before, given you land, and here you were. And you were rocking along. As I remember, from my end, you were there in the village by yourself.
That's correct.
Because occasionally Patrick would fly back to the United States, or you might. You weren't always together there in the village. Always, you sometimes one or sometimes mostly both of you, but sometimes just one of you were there in the village. So, did that happen a lot or not?
Probably about once a year, one of us would fly back to the States.
Okay.
When we were in Nigeria, we always made sure that one of us stayed in country, just to keep the work going on. The continuity we felt was important.
Right.
And so I'd been there at that point, I think a couple of months, and I was expecting Patrick to come back in another month, if I remember correctly. So it wasn't unusual to be there by myself. Just meant just a little more responsibility, a little bit more going on. Just
by that time, you would have been well versed with the language, so the communication wasn't quite as much of a barrier as well. So
by that point, I could have casual conversations. I could teach in Hausa. I could say what I needed to say and hear, hopefully, what I needed to hear. And
you were sometimes providing unique solar-powered audio stuff for the Fulani. Talk about that just briefly, if you will. I think that's a part for me of even this story.
Sure. They had just recently translated the New Testament into the Fulani language, and there was a device that was produced by a particular ministry that was not very big, about the size of a smartphone, and it had a solar panel on the back, and on the front was a screen, a digital screen, and it had the Fulani New Testament loaded into it. It was a digital player, and had a few Bible teachings to go along with that, and a few songs even. And basically, these were audio players that had the Bible that the Fulani, the nomadic people, could take with them. When the battery ran down, they could put it on a rock, put it in the sun, let it charge back up, and they were hearing the New Testament as they traveled. And it was probably much more effective than any missionary would have been, because it went with them wherever they went. And being Muslims, there would be times that certainly that would be frowned upon, to be listening to the Christian scriptures. But because this device was so small, a person could have it, and when they were out with their cattle by themselves, they could listen to it. So it was just a very incredible and effective way to get the word of God out.
How many of them do you think you distributed to that group of people, roughly?
In the hundreds. That's a good question. I don't remember.
Be interesting
getting
to
a
know
final
how many
count.
of them still exist today, wouldn't it?
And how far they went across Nigeria or West Africa, for that matter.
Yeah.
When you're talking about a nomadic people group that even travels outside of Nigeria at times and goes into other countries, no telling how far.
So, in that trade route, was it common for there to be marauders or people that would go and do all kind of mischief, both to the Fulani tribes or the tribes? I'm sorry, I may have, to the tribes as they traveled. I mean, did that happen? Was there a lot of crime along the way? Was that common?
It was getting to be more common, and a lot of it was the Fulani in disputes with local farmers.
I see.
They would pass through villages, and they might be grazing on farmland that somebody was trying to grow crops on, and so that would create tension. And so there had been some attacks. There had been some reprisal attacks. There had been a couple of murders in our area in the last year or so. That was not very common, but it was becoming more frequent.
More increasing. Yeah. Now, as you jump into this, you're in the village for several months there while Patrick's back here in the States, and I'm in close contact with him. I know because I know he was back here, and then were there rumors of people experiencing, captivity or kidnappings or so? Were there rumors of stuff like this or not?
There were oil workers.
Okay.
Typically foreign oil workers in the South, and some had been kidnapped. That was something that was fairly frequent, but that was a long way from where we were.
Okay.
I believe it was about 6 months before this event. There was a female missionary, an older lady, that was kidnapped.
Okay.
And so again, it was something that wasn't very common, but since has become more common.
Okay. So what happened?
It was about 1:00 in the morning, and I was suddenly woken out of sleep and was a bit disoriented, as you would think. And I immediately thought that it must be somebody coming for medicine, which is not completely uncommon. But what was odd was there was a lot of flashlight beams kind of bouncing off the walls of my bedroom. And so I got up, and I heard a very gruff voice tell me to open the door, and I began to suspect this is not normal. This is not a villager that has come to the house. And as I proceeded to open the door, I didn't know at the time, but a number of men immediately come into the house, noticed a couple of machine guns that they had with them, and I had some dogs that were sleeping next to me, and one of those dogs kind of jumped up and out of fear ran out of the house, and one of the guys holding a gun tried to shoot the dog. And so in a mud brick house, that was a very, very loud explosive sound. In a very quiet village, it was very loud. And I'm just trying to be calm. I'm trying to assess the situation, realizing that at the very least I'm getting robbed. And as these men proceeded to ransack the house around me. And the leader, who was the only one who actually had his face covered in all of this, he was swinging a stick around his head, and he was asking me where I kept valuables, where I kept guns and gold and jewelry and things like that. And I was trying to explain to him that I don't have any firearms. I don't have anything that I think you would think is valuable like that. I do have this money that I've collected from selling medicine, and this is all I have, and I offered that to him. And I guess he believed me at that point, but they continued to go through the house. And then when they were done in the house, they demanded that I step outside, and they had me walk them around the property so they could see everything that we had. And then they said to me, let's go. And so I was like, well, this is more than a robbery. Right. I'm being kidnapped. I was still wearing my underclothes because I just got out of bed, so I was able to convince them to let me get dressed. It's the middle of the rainy season. They let me get a raincoat and put my shoes on, but that's all I left the house with. And then they proceeded to march me up the trail toward the main road, and I knew that everybody in the village had heard the gunfire. So they were awake, but I also knew that they probably would not be foolish enough to try to come and do anything. But I would find out later that there were a couple of young men who I had been working with in discipleship that actually were hiding nearby and had witnessed this large contingency of men. It was actually 9 men that came to the house. And they didn't see me in their midst. They just saw these men walk by away from our house. And they began to think at that time that I must have been.
Now, these were not local people.
They were not. They were Fulani, the people group that we worked with, but they were not from our area.
Okay.
And they'd heard that a couple of white guys were living deep in the bush, and I came to learn that they thought that we were there doing business, maybe doing mining or something to make money.
Joke was on them.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I had to spend quite a bit of time that first night as we're walking along and taking breaks, leaving the village. We walked until the sun rose, so we're walking for hours. And a few times when we sat down, I'm having to convince them that I'm a missionary. I'm not who you think I am. I'm actually here helping your people, and I'm just trying to explain what we do in terms of the health care that we give and the training, the vocational training that we were giving to young men. I think I said at one point, I'm trying to lead young men down a path so they don't end up doing what you're doing. Feel like you have to do now. But saying that very tactfully. And at one point, they had me take my cell phone, one of those old Nokias, if you remember those. It wasn't a smartphone.
Yeah.
I couldn't get a signal in the village, but if I was high enough, if I was in a mountain, I could get cell phone service. And I was to learn later that the location they picked that they took me to on top of a mountain was for the purpose of being able to communicate with that cell phone. But at one point they had said, you need to tell Obama to send, I think it was like $2 million. And so you can be released. And I'm like, well, you just hand me my phone and I'll pull him up my contact list.
You just check with him real quick.
Yeah, so you've gotten some very crucial details wrong about this.
That's right. You obviously have no idea what you've gotten into, but
so let's pause for a minute if we can. What in the world were you feeling in those moments? I mean, like, I know you said you woke up, you were stunned, obviously. Oh, that sounds very, very normal. But by now we're walking. The reality is I'm kidnapped. Mm-hmm. That's sunk in already. Even though you're hoping if you talk to them, maybe they'll come around. Mm-hmm. What are you feeling, Jeff?
At that point, I think it was primarily survival mode.
Okay.
I did not know where they were taking me. Didn't know if they were going to feed me, if they were going to give me something to drink. And so I was already thinking in terms of how can I keep myself alive? Mm-hmm. Even as far as one of them had a plastic water bottle, and I was wondering if they discarded that on the way, if I could pick that up just to be able to maybe fill it up in a stream that we might pass, just so I could stay hydrated. So I think at that point it was more just survival.
Gotcha. Not
knowing what would lie ahead.
I want to live. Mm-hmm. Period. I want to live.
Yep.
How I don't know, like how much. Not exploring is probably the wrong word, but how well y'all knew the area. Did you most of the time know where you were?
I did, as long as we were on the main road.
Okay.
Which I say main road is a large tractor path.
Yeah. Right.
Our vehicle, our Land Rover, was the only vehicle that went in that area besides tractors that came in to haul out lumber. Once we got off the main road, we were in an area that I hadn't been to before. And as I said, they had already scouted out this location.
Gotcha.
But we walked probably at least an hour, if not an hour and a half, off the main road, climbing a mountain to a strange location for me, anyhow.
For sure.
So you're on the mountain. Mm-hmm. Now what?
The sun's coming up. They've already made their intentions clear in terms of we are expecting a big payout for you. And if your people don't come through, then we're going to kill you. And I mean, they had said that clearly. And the leader, he had asked me to think of somebody that I could contact that could negotiate for me. And our attorney, the man, a Nigerian man that we used to handle our immigration paperwork and other documents like that, he was the one who came to mind. He's a Christian. He's a friend, educated, knows Western culture, spoke English well. And so he came to mind, and they just said, at some point we're going to have you contact him or contact whoever you come up with, basically. We got to the top of the mountain where I would end up staying for the whole time that I was held. And by this point, the sun was coming up and it was beginning to rain. And as I said, this was the rainy season, so we were just all getting very wet. And I think that's when the fear began to sit in, as I just realized the situation that I was in, and didn't have any idea how things were going to work out, obviously, but didn't have any idea even how negotiations were going to go, who was going to be involved stateside with that, who were they even going to contact. We were our own mission organization. We didn't have deep pockets. We didn't have
headquarters.
contacts.
You didn't have a headquarters.
We didn't have a headquarters. There's no corporation that was on standby to be able to satisfy their demands. And as it rained, I'm sitting probably about 25 yards from the group of kidnappers, and they're miserable because they're getting wet too. They're looking at me and I'm looking at them, and just in that time period, you have a lot of time to think and to ponder and to wonder what's coming next. But as I sat there, this was the first of many times that I would begin to think about Scripture. In some cases, passages that would come to mind, and in other cases, just Scripture that I'd memorized over the years. They did not let me take my Bible with me. And so the Word of God that I had with me during that time was what I had memorized, what I had buried in my heart. And what came to mind as I was sitting there initially was Job chapter 1. And I kind of just began to think through that and thought about the moment when Satan comes into the presence of God, and God says to him, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And he says to Satan, "He's a faithful man." And paraphrase here, what the adversary basically says is, well, of course, he's faithful because you blessed him and you've protected him and you've prospered him. And the Lord says to Satan, this is Job chapter 1, verse 12, he says, all that he has, I give into your hand, only do not put forth your hand upon him. In other words, do whatever you want to him, just don't touch his body physically. And that's what came to mind. I didn't know why at the time.
This was day one.
This was the morning of day one.
First
day.
Now, as we go, we'll learn that this extended for a while. It wasn't just overnight. It wasn't just 24 hours. It wasn't just 48 hours. Yep. Do you remember the initial contact you or anybody had with those that would be negotiating for you then? At what point did that happen? At what point did you start realizing that there were people here in the United States who didn't know what was going on, perhaps? Did you know that? And were you able to talk with your negotiator?
I was. Finally, it stopped raining. The sun was fully up by now. Kidnappers
Still day one.
Still day one. Still morning of day one. Late morning by this point. They had made a fire. They were drying out. They invited me over to begin to dry out myself. First of many times that I'd have to dry out that week. And he handed me, the leader of this group, handed me my cell phone that they had taken and said, now it's time for you to call whoever you're going to call. And so I called my friend Utabe, who, as I mentioned, is our attorney. And as soon as he picked up the phone, I said, "Hey, Utabe." And he said, "Hey, Jeff, how's it going?" And I said, "Well, not too well." And the next words out of his mouth were, "I know I'm already on your case."
Oh.
Well, I had no idea at that point how he knew what was going on.
Yeah.
But what I would discover later that, in fact, things were already in motion. The American embassy had already been contacted. The Nigerian government was already involved. And so there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes already because the Lord had gone ahead of that situation. And that goes back to Gideon, who I had mentioned in the last episode. As I was leaving the village the night before, as I said, a young man who worked for us on our farm, on our mission station. His name is Danjuma, and he was hiding behind a line of cactus. And so when this group passed by, he saw everybody except he didn't see me. So he was thinking that he was going to find my body in the house the next morning, and he went to the house and saw that I wasn't there. Well, he remembered a conversation we'd had several weeks before where I had just told him out of the blue, because I felt led to tell him this. I said, if anything ever happens to me, since Patrick isn't here, I need you to call Gideon.
Oh.
He had met Gideon before, and I knew that Gideon would, know what to do or have an idea of what to do. And Danjuma, the guy that worked for me, he's saying, what do you think is going to happen? I have no idea. I don't think anything is going to happen, but I just feel like I need to let you know that if something does, to call him. He remembered that, and he called Gideon. And Gideon got that phone call in that city that's 4 hours away. He walked over to another missionary's house that he knew, told him that I'd been kidnapped, and that man immediately called the American Embassy. And State Department got involved very early on, before I even had made that initial phone call. And so just one of many instances where the Lord was going ahead of this whole situation.
Yeah. Wow.
That's gotta be. I mean, what? See if you can try to expand on what ran through your mind with that knowledge, because I imagine they're handing you the phone right there, to make that call, and you're like, okay, it's time to break this news, to your friend, to your lawyer, and see if we can get the ball rolling. And then the first thing basically that you're told as soon as you pick up the phone is hey, the government of the country that you're in and the government of the country that the USA, or at least the embassies, whatever, are already involved, and people are trying. Is there not? I mean,
is there hope?
Yeah, is there some kind? There's hope. There's certainly. I would imagine you're you kind of look up at that and you're like, okay, you're doing something here.
I'm not alone. You were
right.
not alone, at least in some degree.
Relief.
Yeah.
I mean, we know intellectually that God is with us, but when he goes ahead of us and clearly makes himself known, then there is
it. Yeah.
That's right, that glimmer of hope that I am not alone, regardless of what happens. I'm not alone.
Yeah. So we're hearing about it on this end. Mom, Dad, Patrick, myself, Lenora, and I'm listening to Patrick. Crying out to God for his brother, Patrick doesn't cry like I do, and I don't know if he cried a lot during that time, but I'm pretty sure I saw some tears through the week that he spent. He came and stayed actually in the room we're in. This was his room, along with the room adjacent here, where there's a bedroom, and he spent those days with us. So we had a front row seat on this end through Patrick, because people were staying in touch with him. We were with your mom and dad some. We were with officials, and I don't need to be specific, but we were with officials who were definitely on the case on this end, FBI and otherwise, who were surrounding really us, your parents especially, and Patrick. We're hearing of some of the negotiations, actually hearing recordings of the negotiations between Etabay and the ringleader, who was not with you. Let's talk about that for a minute. The ringleader was in a city somewhere. We think it sounded like it. Cars, horns blowing in the background. He's talking all kinds of crazy stuff. Frankly, saying he's a Christian. I know your churches have money. Saying stuff like that to your negotiator. He's not talking to us. He's talking to your negotiator. So on this end, we're hearing it, and it's scary on this end too, but in a different way. We're scared for you. We're not scared for us so much, obviously. We're scared for you. I wish it'd be fun to say that went on for 24 hours or 48 hours, but this started happening first day, second day, third day. How much conversation did you know that your guys that were watching you were having with the ringleader who was back somewhere else, and what was that interaction like?
Let me back up just a little bit. The leader, he told Utube in that first phone call that when I didn't talk to Utube long. It was just basically a confirmation of life call for me so he could hear my voice. Before he hung up, he made all sorts of threats as far as what was going to happen to me if they didn't get what they wanted. And then he hung the phone up, and this is still the first morning, and the leader turned to me and he said, usually by this point we would have started torturing you, which told me they'd done this before. And
yeah, they were not rookies.
They were not rookies. And you would be pleading with us to kill you because of the pain. And so the person on the other end of the line could hear that, and that would motivate him. But then he stopped and he looked at me and he said, however, the Lord has told me not to touch you.
This is the head guy.
This is the leader.
That's the Job 1 reference.
Yep.
Right, yeah.
So the Lord has told me not to touch you, and I've told all my men the same thing. And I'm thinking, Job chapter 1, verse 12. And, talk about some assurance. And it's not to say I didn't fear again, because it certainly was many moments of fear after that. But I was never harmed physically. I was never touched physically. They took a lot away from me, sure, but they didn't do anything to me physically. And I'm talking to this guy who claimed to be a Christian at times, but was also claiming to be a Muslim. Obviously, did not fear God, but somehow the Holy Spirit had spoken into his conscience, and he made sure his men knew that as well. But to answer your question, he left after that. He said, "I'm going to Abuja, which was the capital of Nigeria, and I'll be doing my negotiations from there." And so once he left, I didn't see him again, and I was actually only left with 4 guys for the remaining 6 days that I was up there. And the only contact I had was about once a day. I would make a phone call to Utube, and that was just a confirmation of life call. Probably lasted less than a minute. You heard some of those. But other than that, I didn't know what was going on.
Well, it was good to hear your voice.
Yeah.
So
Great to hear your voice.
6 days, and the days are long, right? Because you're out there pretty much doing nothing, right? I mean,
Getting wet.
yeah. So
Drying out.
Did you have any interesting conversations with the 4 guys who were around? Because you kind of think of it too, like they were out there probably doing something they didn't want to be doing either.
I was saying
They were-
morale had
Yeah.
to be low.
Yeah,
Talk about that.
morale
Talk
was
about
low.
that.
Less
low.
fear, but definitely low morale.
on their end they weren't afraid, but they were obviously being told to do something that they may not.
They
have
were
been
ticked
necessarily
off,
been
by the
excited.
way.
They
Yeah,
were.
What
so-
I remember.
so,
They were.
well,
But
talk
about that.
Yeah, they were unprepared. They didn't think this was going to take a long time. They thought that, maybe a day or two and they'd get what they wanted and everything would be said and done. But it wasn't working that way. So, they didn't come with tents or with shelter, and it's the rainiest part of the year. We're sitting exposed on top of a cliff. I'm getting wet, which is miserable, but they're getting wet too. And so they're miserable as well. And, that's kind of making them upset with me. I couldn't do anything about it, but nevertheless, they felt like I was the problem because my people weren't moving things along as quickly as they should be. And so I'm being careful in my conversations with them. I'm trying, I'm thinking about getting kidnapped 101. What are some things?
Yeah.
They don't necessarily teach a class on this, okay?
First of all,
Listen, can I remember what I learned there?
humanize yourself, so be kind, but also don't antagonize your kidnappers.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be careful. I'm not having a whole lot of conversation with them. But that second day, I began thinking a lot about Philippians chapter 4, rejoice always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentle spirit be made known to all men. The Lord is near. I just kept turning that verse over in my mind and thinking, okay, Lord, you want me to rejoice? Okay. I'll try to do that in this situation. It says always. It doesn't say, except when you're kidnapped. So I'm trying to rejoice. And I'm thinking the Lord is near. He's shown that. Mm-hmm. And so I just have to keep trusting that God is much closer than I can imagine. He knows exactly what's going on. And let your gentle spirit be made known to all men, which is not anything I can really do other than the way I put those verses together was, if I'm trusting the Lord, if I'm rejoicing in him like he's asking me to do, then he's going to somehow use me to influence these men. And that was what I was clinging to. As I said, we didn't have a whole lot of conversations. At one point we did talk about, I did kind of warn them that the Bible says that, what you sow, you will reap. Mm-hmm. And that's universal. That applies to everybody. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I tried to let them know, again, what I did, why I was in Nigeria, and just hoping and praying that would make an impact on them.
Mm-hmm. What do you think was a turning point? Were there any turning points? And at what day did you think there was any kind of turning point with them?
They got increasingly more upset.
Yeah. So no turning points, more just
there was
more
not.
Spiral.
That's right.
Yeah.
We were spiraling
but it was the right
down.
kind of turning point, actually.
Mm-hmm.
We'll find out later.
Yeah, as far as my eating and drinking was concerned, they did provide for me. They had a runner that was coming each day, and he was bringing food for us, and they would give me some bread to eat and local soft drink to drink. And so, they were at least taking care of me in that regard. But otherwise, I mean, there's just a lot of dead time. There's a lot of time for me to think in terms of, should I try to escape? Should I try to run? Do I want to get shot in the back? Can I outrun these guys?
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Should I just, play it cool and try to keep going along with what they wanted me to do? Only broken by that once a day phone call. And as they're getting more and more disgruntled, those that are holding me, those four, I can tell, and this is about day 4 or 5, are starting to make their own plans in terms of maybe we should re-kidnap this guy, defect from our leader, and reopen negotiations because we don't think this is going well and we don't think our leader is negotiating terms correctly.
Franchise.
But yeah,
That's right.
Franchise.
And they're speaking the Fulani language. I speak Hausa. When they wanted to talk to me, they spoke in Hausa. But when they were conversing amongst themselves, I couldn't understand them. But I could piece things together. And I'm just thinking, this isn't going well.
Yeah.
And there's not much I can do about it.
Because I'm sure you were not getting much information.
No.
Yeah.
Other than occasionally they would just tell me, your people better come through. It's going to go bad for you.
Yeah.
So on this end, we were told, we being myself, Lenora, and other people, not to talk much about this. We were instructed that way by government officials to not make, that's not to get out. It's never to get out in the news. Of course, we were not going to do that anyhow. But I had a strong sense that we were supposed to get with a group of people who knew you and bring them to this house where Patrick was and where we were, and to have a prayer meeting. There was some reluctance a little bit about that. Well, the FBI, I said, I don't care, because I'm going to have people that will not go to the news. We're going to have people that are going to sit here and pray. I don't remember what day this was, but on here it was a Saturday evening. And there was a circle of people in that living room upstairs in this building. And we prayed like a house on fire. But one of the things, Jeff, that was prayed out loud and that we prayed about, that God would bring confusion among the men that were working with you. Now, we didn't know a lot about this confusion, but that was the thing that God revealed to us to pray about. And there was strong prayer from people like Mike and Becky Farrell and other people who were in this house, along with quite a few other people, maybe 10 of us or 12 of us. And that was a strong prayer. It was not long after that we learned through the tapes that there was a lot of confusion going on. There was a lot of discord going on. And that was actually, while at one point it could have worked against you, was actually starting to work in your favor. Just like let's franchise it. Let's do this. Let's do that. Now, I'm not saying that prayer happened before the franchise idea came up. I am saying that increasingly became the thing where we could see that they were divided in terms of what to do next. They'd already been told they couldn't torture you like they usually did. They're already, by God, they've already been told that kind of stuff. And so they're probably, this is just not going well for them.
So
Not just for you.
So that talking about how that kind of came about, and there's division and confusion. Can you like maybe go into a little bit of detail of, and maybe you didn't know it all at the time, but kind of what that ended up looking, that division and confusion ended up looking like?
Sure. A lot of this I pieced together later on, of course, not knowing that there was a prayer circle happening Saturday night here. So it was Sunday morning where I was, and that morning I'd been thinking about Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evildoers came upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumbled and they fell. I didn't know why I was meditating on that. That was just what had come to mind. And I'm just praying through Psalm 27. And that day was different because all of a sudden, the four guys holding me that are wanting to franchise this thing, without getting instructions from their leader, they all of a sudden said, "You call your attorney." And I knew this wasn't good because they were acting outside of their chain of command. And they had me call Utabe, and then they immediately grabbed the phone from me, and they just one of the guys started threatening him and started cursing at him, and his other friends in the background kept saying, "Ask him how much. Ask him how much." They wanted to know where the negotiations had gotten to, because if it wasn't enough in their eyes, then they were going to, re-kidnap me and just completely complicate everything. Not that it wasn't already complicated.
Yeah, right.
So it must have lasted 4 or 5 minutes, and I just keep hearing them say, "Ask him how much, ask him how much." And finally, he hangs up the phone and he turns to them and they say, "How much?" And he says, "Oh man, I forgot to ask."
And they're yelling at him the whole time.
And it's like, that was the whole point of the phone call. I find out later they're praying about this same time in the States. Lord, confuse his captors. And I'm thinking about, Psalm 27, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumbled and they fell.
Yeah.
So then from that point, since we've made it to that point, yes, like where did we go from there? What was the
Let's talk about as you headed toward what became your release. Obviously, you're sitting here.
Yeah, that's not a spoiler, I'm afraid. Or that is a spoiler, I'm afraid. Yeah.
It was the last day, the 6th day. I didn't know it at the time. I knew something was up because the timing. Well, I didn't talk to Utabe that day. They were having their own conversations, and I didn't make a confirmation of life call, and so I knew something was happening. And indeed, they confirmed that. They said, this is the day that your attorney is supposed to go meet our leader, and whatever is happening is happening. And so we hope it works out for you. And they gave me back a backpack they had taken from the house, and they gave me back a flashlight they had taken from the house that they had been using this whole time at night. And they told me to get ready to go. Okay, sounds good to me. Still didn't know what was happening. They got another phone call. I'd probably been waiting a couple hours after just sitting there with his backpack on, waiting. And they got another phone call. And when they were off the phone, one of the guys turned to me that had been talking to their leader, and he said, "I have some bad news for you. Your attorney went to meet our guys, but he brought the police, and the police shot and killed our leader. And so it's over. We're going to kill you. What do you think about that?" That stinks. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
And I didn't know what to think. I sat and waited a few more minutes, and they repeated the same thing again. It's over for you. And then eventually I was told to get up and start walking, and told to walk down this mountain, leaving this area that I hadn't left in 6 days, and heading down the mountain, all of them behind me, these 4 men. And I'm thinking, am I about to get shot in the back? Is this the end? what's happening. I had no idea. And they start kind of joking, and one of them's like, "Don't worry, you're going to sleep in your bed tonight." So I don't know what to believe. And they're just getting inside of my head, I think is what they were trying to do anyhow. We get to the bottom of the mountain, and this is the end of the last day. The sun's starting to set, and they say, "Follow this trail, and you'll get back to your village." And so I just start walking, and I turned around, and the last thing that was said to me was "Alayaki Ayehanya," which in Hausa means "God keep you safe on the road." And so I gave the proper response. I said "Amen," and kept going. The last thing I said to them, and realized at that point that they weren't following me, that this was indeed over. I had no idea what had gone down, but I was apparently released. And as I'm walking, it's getting darker. This is a slippery, rocky trail. I don't really know where I am. I'm just trying to stay on the path until I can get to a place that I recognize. And so I pull the flashlight out. And this is one of those big Maglite flashlights that take the big, I guess, D-size batteries. Yeah. They had been using it the whole time at night. And when I pulled it out and turned it on, I noticed it was very dim. So
cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Right. I mean, this is going to be a long trip back. Yeah. And I shine that dim light in front of me. You've probably done this camping before, or trying to hike at night. And then I kind of memorize the next few steps, turn it off, take those steps, stop, turn it back on, see where I need to go, turn it off. And so I'm going along like this very slowly. But as I'm going along, I start to realize that each time I turn the flashlight back on, it seems like it's a little bit brighter. I'm like, well, that's weird. It's a nice kind of weird, but I'll take it. And turning it on, it's brighter. Turning it on, it's brighter. Didn't know what was going on. Finally, probably after 30 minutes, got to the main road where I knew where I was. And I looked down, and it's like the flashlight's operating as if I just put brand new batteries in it. So it's pitch dark by now. I'm like, this is going to be very helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Keep that flashlight on and just hope it stays on until I get back to the village. And in fact, it does. It took me about an hour and a half, 2 hours to walk all the way back. But the flashlight never went out, made it all the way back. And I did not realize it at that time. But as I thought back on the whole ordeal, I was like, that flashlight shouldn't have stayed on.
No way.
But it was as if the Lord was saying, I got you through all of this. Preserved your life. You've been released. Don't worry. I'm going to get you back to the village. You're going to get there without...
After all that, he's like, I think I can keep a flashlight on.
That's right. That's
After
right.
doing all those things.
I'll
right?
keep you from spraining your ankle.
Yeah.
And you'll make it back. And in fact, it did help me going into the village because the villagers were in such high alert at this point. They had set up guards around the perimeter.
Okay.
And I'm already thinking ahead. I don't want to get shot
right
by a black powder gun going in, which they hunted with. And so I had the flashlight on and I'm trying to, greet from a distance, say, hey, it's me. And of course, when I got back in the village, everybody's looking at me like I'm a ghost because they definitely thought that I wouldn't make it back. But even just to see the Lord's provision in the small thing up until the very end, he was near.
So I got to ask you this because I'm just trying to. What in the world were you feeling on that main road walking? I mean, like, are you now stunned again? Or, I mean, there's got to be some joy, but on the other hand, like, what's going on, Jeff? What are you thinking?
Sure. Numbness.
Okay.
Yeah. And relief and some confusion.
Okay.
Certainly relief.
Yeah.
That they had gone the other direction, so I was free. But my concern at that point was, as I said, not to get shot by a villager. And
yeah, after all that.
And we had a satellite phone in the village that we would use for emergencies.
Okay.
And I was just thinking if I can get back to that, I can call Lutebe because the kidnappers had taken the phone that I've been using on top of the mountain. I can let him know that I'm back, and that can inform everybody else.
Did you do that?
I did.
All right.
I did. So.
And what was Udebe's response?
Joy.
I bet.
Maybe some surprise.
Uh-huh.
And just, I think, of course, relief himself. And then I think probably he's excited to be the one that's walked with me through all of this vicariously. He's going to be the one that's going to be able to announce to everybody, hey, he made it out. The Lord has worked.
So there was there was concern on his end that I guess maybe that they would hold up to what they agreed on, or
Yes, I was to piece some things together later to find out a lot more about what was going on, and then there was a whole nother drama on his end of things, that the Nigerian government actually sent some of their own guys undercover to go to make the final negotiations in person with the leader, and they had to go through kind of their own dramatic ordeal. But yes, what was the question again? I'm sorry. I got lost just thinking in terms of.
Oh no, you're okay. I was just wondering, like on his end, was there a lot of concern about them not holding up their end of the deal?
Yeah, there definitely was. Yeah. So that moment when things began to break down, that fifth or sixth day, the early morning of the sixth day, there was definitely that concern, I think, all across the board. That this was not going to work out.
Well, listening in on a few of the conversations between Udube and this leader, it was all over the map. You know, so who knows what if they're going to be all over the map now? You know what I'm saying? Well, are they? What's their? You know, it's one time it's this, and next time it's this, next time it's
nobody knew
that kind of thing. Right. Nobody knew.
So, what was the point for you where you were like, "It's finally over. Like this is over. I'm safe." Like, because I know you got back to the village, you made the phone call, but even then you said there was like some trepidation about approaching, you know.
Yeah.
And but even then, like, was it all the way till you got back to the States? Like, when were you like the final exhale of like that's officially over? Because I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, and even after those guys waved goodbye, I would still be thinking like, what if, you know. Because you said they were saying things like kind of like mess with your mind. Like, what if they were like, you know, turn around and like, why would we let this guy go? Yeah. So when was like the ultimate part of like, this is officially done?
It wasn't when I got back to the village. I mean, there was certainly relief, and there was certainly a feeling that things were concluding. But I mean, I'm going back into a house that's still ransacked.
Right.
I'm having to sleep in the same bed that
sleep. I'm sure in quotations.
Yeah. Right. And so everything, you know. It's triggering, so to speak.
Will they come back? Yeah. Will they come back?
Yep. Mm-hmm. I think it was the next morning when the American embassy had sent a couple of the agents who'd been working on the case to pick me up.
Okay.
And so I'm actually in custody, in protective custody, and I'm heading out of the village. And at least then I know that there's a feeling of more safety than there had been. Mm-hmm. You know, at least I'm with some people that could do something about it if
they came back again. Yeah. Okay.
And we're leaving that area. But in fact, Patrick and I returned to Nigeria for a couple of months, and so we went back to the village and we spent some time there. And at that point, we're not intending to leave Nigeria. And so there was some closure from the kidnapping, but I would even say enough closure that I was able to go back and plan on resuming the work. Mm-hmm.
When you came back to the States, how long did you stay before you and Patrick went back? I don't remember that.
I believe it was about 4 months. We went back in December.
Okay, so you went back. Yeah, it was about 4. So you were here 4 months with family and church family and everybody, and then you went back for about 3 months?
Went back in December, and then my mom, who had been very sick from cancer for a number of years, she actually passed away at the end of December of 2015. Right. So I returned home, wasn't in Nigeria more than I think 3 weeks, and then returned again. I believe it was April.
Okay.
And stayed for a few months.
Mm-hmm. And then it seemed good to you all, and I guess as far as the government was concerned, they did not want you to stay.
They basically said to us, you can stay in Nigeria, but you can't stay in that particular village because we can't keep you safe. Okay. Now, we didn't have the expectation of them keeping us safe. Sure, that wasn't a factor in determining whether we would go back. I mean, we knew that we were off the beaten path, and we knew the cost of being there. But we had to decide, now that we're on the government's radar, we certainly want to follow whatever stipulations they put upon us. Do we go somewhere else in Nigeria and start over again, or do we consider another mission field? And just the prospect of starting over in a country that's unstable, that was already kind of heading in a direction that it has proven to have gotten a lot worse in terms of the uptick in kidnappings all across the country, the Muslim extremism, the Fulani local village tension has risen, the persecution's gone up, and so it didn't seem realistic or feasible to say, let's start over in a country that something similar might happen again, and we would have to leave, but maybe for a different reason.
Right.
I hear you. So there's so much we could keep talking about, Jeff, and thank you for this. And I remember the joy I felt as your pastor. I claimed myself to be your pastor at that time. So I remember the joy I felt. I remember the joy we felt. The concern we had for you going back, I know your parents felt the same way too, and other people who knew, and both you and Patrick were both concerned about it, of course. Mm-hmm. But then you had to leave again, an investment of 9 years, this time with medical clinic built, our barn and a house, and 9 acres of land, and animals and tractors and all kinds of stuff. That's leaving a lot behind. Mm-hmm. It's leaving a lot behind. And so at some point, maybe we'll have you back to talk about what that journey was like, the grief that I know you felt, the grief that you felt, the uncertainty about what do we do next. I walked with you through some of that.
You sure did.
And that certainly would be worthy of us exploring that with you as we think about the mission field in Macon and how God directed both of you there.
Jeff Shelnutt, Season 1.
Jeff Shelnutt, Season 1, our producer says. I'm for it.
Sounds good.
Is there anything final for us?
I was going to say, give us the, like when you're watching a movie that was, somewhat non-fictional, and you get the little, like right before the credits roll, you get kind of like the readout of like, hey, here's how this wrapped up and whatever. It's like give us a
wrap up,
post movie wrap up. Yeah. Wrong state. Yeah, wrong Macon. And not a plumber. Anyway.
Right city, wrong state.
Jeff and Patrick ended up in a place they had never heard of that became the next mission field, and that's Mississippi. And I discovered that all the experiences that I'd had, both in Belize and Nigeria, have prepared me for the next step, which we're in the midst of at this point, just the ministry that we are able to do in Mississippi. But who would have thought that I was prepared on the foreign mission field for the domestic mission field?
Usually it's the reverse.
That's right. It usually is.
And the work is ongoing.
It is. Awesome. And it's got its own set of challenges. Some similarities, but some big differences too.
Yeah. We love it. And once again, thanks so much for being on with us. So, for Derek and Steve, Chris behind the cameras, once again, our very special guest, Jeff Shelnutt. My name is Eric. This has been Preacher in the Hat, and we'll see you next time.